Welcome to Flourish, the podcast. My name is Frank Bernard, and I'll be your host for this episode. Whether you're listening in the morning, your lunch break, or in the evening, whether you're in your car, at home, or at work, we welcome you. I don't know about you, but my favorite time listening to podcasts is when I'm doing chores. I find it paints the silence and makes it much more enjoyable. Arthritis is a painful disease, and millions of Canadians suffer in silence from it. That's why we're here to talk about the quiet and often misunderstood challenges that are associated with it. We hope this is a format you will like and that it will help you flourish with arthritis. Our guest today is Cristina Montoya. Cristina is 38 years old and was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndrome when she was 22. She's a registered dietitian and she's the author behind the blog arthritisdietician.com. Some of you might have read some of the nutrition-related content she has contributed to for the Arthritis Society. She's originally from Colombia. She moved to Ontario 13 years ago and is now married and the mother of a 21-month-old boy. In her spare time, Cristina loves reading psychological thrillers, Zumba, cooking, learning about medical cannabis, and of course, playing with her son. Cristina, welcome to Flourish, the podcast.
Thank you, Frank. So happy to be here.
How are you doing today? Yeah, we're happy to have you here. It's a fun thing to have you here. We've been looking forward to a long discussion with you and to talk about nutrition and dietitian and diets. So how are we doing today?
Actually doing pretty good today. I'm feeling energized. I have my flowers on my head. That's a good sign.
Always good. And how much of that is attributable to the fact that you're eating well?
It actually is because on Wednesday I had my infusion for the Orencia, the biologic, and it also usually warms me out. And so I have to make sure that I really need to get some like a nourishment in my body that gives me some extra energy. And so, for instance, today I and also use some convenience foods, right? Because I'm tired and I really don't want to go into a lot of preparation. So I love having some nice kind of what is it called, like a oatmeal, and I love it. It's made of hemp, buckwheat, and oats. So what I do is I dress it up with hemp seeds, coconuts, a little bit of dry fruit. I had dates today, and I think that was very quick today for me. I didn't need to have an elaborate meal. And for lunch, I had a leftover chickpeas and rice with a stir sauteed mushrooms and spinach. Yum.
That sounds very delicious indeed. We'll get to maybe a bit more of your personal diet and what people with arthritis can look into to incorporate in their own diets. But before we get into that, you have been living with arthritis for quite some time. Can you tell us a little bit about how your diagnosis came to be?
It was really a silly accident. 18 years ago, my symptoms started, and so when my fingers got stuck in a cab, trying to close the door, and from then on, it's just it just woke up this tiger. I had my swollen hands and swollen knees. It was a rapid onset though of symptoms. I know that doesn't really happen to everyone, but within a month, I could no longer walk, dress myself, feed myself, go to the bathroom. I felt like a baby again, and not in a good sense. It was the sense that to need that help from my mother, it was so shameful. Like I was 21, and it was horrible. Like it was really a horrible experience to feel so much pain and not knowing why. So that was the onset of it. Yeah, not a happy memory, I can say.
No, I would imagine, and like you mentioned, for some people it takes a bit of time for all these symptoms to appear, but to you it was kind of all at once. I'm guessing obviously there are some learnings, when it's a new disease and you're consulting different professionals that help you navigate this disease. But um, when we go back to nutrition, we know now, and maybe you can talk a bit about that it's very important to stay to have a healthy diet when you live with arthritis. Is that something that you knew right away when you were
Not
diagnosed,
at
or is that
all.
something that you had to kind of learn and figure out?
No, I know from that time, you see, almost 18 years, there's a lot about a myth nutrition. And so even when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, I was also diagnosed with Sjogren's syndrome. It's just another autoimmune disease. And that one did take many years to be diagnosed because I had the symptoms since I was 8 years old. So that one with the that caused severe dry mouth. I have swallowing difficulties, have a dry cough. So that I think unconsciously, I didn't really think about it, but I did have to make changes to my diet just because I had to deal with a lot of digestive issues. So I didn't know. But even back then, it's kind of funny. The one thing that has really stayed is the nightshades. All the nightshades foods was like, don't eat nightshades. That was what I heard when I got diagnosed. Don't drink milk. And those were like the biggest ones. Uh, Gluten and others kind of came along. So I was living in Colombia. I was diagnosed in Colombia. Everything really is wholesome there, right? Like it's fresh foods, fresh vegetables, everything. It was from a small town, so everything was fresh. There's really no access to like the pesticides or the type of food system that we have here in North America. So at that time, I actually didn't feel that much. Maybe it had an impact, uh, in managing my condition, but I didn't know, right? Because that was just the way I ate. It was just the natural way of eating in Colombia.
Hmm. And once you figured out what were the good foods for you, what would you say are the benefits of a healthy eating habit versus what are the risks of maybe not paying too much attention to what you're eating?
So I think one thing that I learned when I came to Canada, it was a huge contrast of what I was eating back home and when I came to Canada. So when I came to Canada, I realized that there was a lot of access to more processed foods, more animal products. There was more sugar, more salt in the foods. It was something I sometimes I couldn't even eat the foods. It literally will make me sick because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to the amount of like canned foods and canned soups and all that. So for 1 year, I had to live off Ensure. I couldn't tolerate any food, and so that's when I started
Wow.
to make a connection that nutrition, even though is not going to cure my conditions, right? If I make changes, but it's definitely going to support my therapies and it's going to make me feel better. Um,
Yeah. And so how would you describe, for example, your diet?
So my diet, I really try to keep. I honestly really follow what is the Mediterranean diet lifestyle, like that way of eating. And even though I didn't even know all the principles, but I really tried to follow what it's. Make sure it was all like whole grains and the vegetables. I tried to get the local, like here in Canada, I tried to do as local as possible. Sometimes it's difficult, but we can get it right. Get some of your veggies
Yeah.
and also legumes, but that's really part of my culture. Like I eat a lot of beans and lentils and garbanzo beans, so that wasn't a very an adjustment to me. It was just part of my eating habits. um, Also, when it comes to meat, we didn't really eat a lot back home because it was expensive, so we basically eat it like a once a week. And so when I came to Canada, I was really not craving that type of meat. And I do include some chicken and fish once or twice a week. Um, but mostly it's like a plant-based diet. Now it's the famous and fashionable, but that's really how I grew up eating.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always these trends, you know. There's always something that's really it and in at the moment. Is there some of those trends that you see that you think are maybe either very good or perhaps even dangerous on the other side of the
Oh
spectrum?
my God, it was honestly, it happened like overnight. Like all of a sudden, nutrition was not even in the picture when it came to autoimmune diseases. I took a break from everything else, and when I come back from all that break, it's like, oh, I got the autoimmune protocol, the carnivore diet, and you had the intermittent fasting. There's so many diets to choose from that I no wonder how confusing that might be for someone who is especially newly diagnosed.
And how do you navigate that? How do you find what's right for you, or how do you find go through the misinformation? Because sometimes there are some things that are bad for you. So how do you navigate that? How do you make sure that you're going to choose the right diet for you?
I would say that ideally, that what I would like to say is I wish honestly that most more rheumatologists they get questions about nutrition every single day. And I will love for them to actually connect with registered dietitians that can help them, can support them. They don't have to know everything, right? They have so much on their plate. But if they can collaborate with registered dietitians, that's one way that they can help them navigate all that misinformation. But usually, like non-for-profit organizations like the Arthritis Society or Arthritis Foundation, or like the like kind of the small foundations, they also provide like trustable information, or at least they give you links where they can say, okay, this is a really good source and reliable sources of information. But sometimes when you join Facebook groups, they can be supported, but at the same time, so misleading because people are going to say, but this works for me, so it's going to work for you. Get rid of all the meat or get rid of everything, the gluten. So, but what works for you might not work for me. We have completely different bodies. We are at different stages of the diseases. So we need to consider that. If we have someone like a registered dietitian that can understand the pain or the lived experience, I'm one of them, but I know there are more out there working with them in that area. That will be very helpful.
Christina, let's take a short break and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. If you'd like to receive health and wellness advice, self management tips, inspirational stories, and much more to help you move through life with arthritis, sign up to the Flourish e newsletter. To do so, visit arthritis.ca/flourish. Christina, you mentioned the importance of considering a registered dietitian. Is it expensive to see one?
Well, I wouldn't think so. Like, if you're willing to pay $100 for a supplement that you don't know that's gonna work, right? But then you are maybe more hesitant to spend maybe up to $120 for a consultation where they can actually give you some guides on what you're eating and some advice. I think it's so much worth it. It's probably going to save you so like hundreds of dollars on getting the supplements. So I think that I want to put that into perspective because sometimes people say, oh, it's so expensive, but then you're spending all those, like honestly, like hundreds of dollars on supplements that are probably useless.
And so, yeah, yeah. I mean, for some people, I'm sure it's the case. But is it a misconception to say that it's more expensive to eat well consistently?
I will say that actually, I did myself a challenge early this year when I wanted to have everything Mediterranean, and I went on and get all my staples. So initially, when I get in all these extra staples like the extra virgin olive oil or some hemp oil, and getting all the condiments, I think I did spend a little bit of money, but at the same time, it did last. It is lasting, right? It's some staples that I have in my pantry, and I have access to it. In terms of when you call like organic or non-organic, what should I do? And so there's so much misconception because even in organic foods, you still can find like traces of pesticides, but they need to use it, right? So we need to, and people with inflammatory arthritis, we need to keep that balance of what we can access because there's so many expenses that are involved with someone with chronic illness. So I if we have like convenience foods like a pre-chopped old salads and things like that, at the end it doesn't seem to it doesn't come out like way too expensive. Sometimes you buy a bunch of vegetables and they kind of die in the fridge, you never use them. right? So I think it's about I really reflecting on how you are doing your grocery shopping, and that you also keep in mind like every week that you have your shopping list. You don't go outside that shopping list, or try not to, and that kind of keep you on check, right? And so one week you may afford to buy the most expensive staple, maybe next week you don't need to do that, so you have to keep a balance.
What are some of the tips that you can give us to ensure that we eat well, but constantly?
I know that constantly is a really I know it is challenging, and I think that's something that we need to when I work with my clients, or even when I consult during my social media, is that every change is a success. If you don't need to change your breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at once, it's like when you go to the gym, you want to, oh my God, I want to lose all these pounds. And then you go every single day, blah, blah. At the end of the month, you're done, right? I'm done with this. So, but then when you are more consistent, I'm just going to go on the treadmill for maybe 15, 20 minutes every day until you kind of build up that habit, then it becomes easier. Same thing with food, with the healthy eating, or the way you want to change. Maybe you just want to start changing your breakfast, right? Instead of having all like bacon every day, bacon every single day, right? So let's kind of switch it for the delicious omelet, right, with vegetables, with this cooking extra virgin olive oil. Or you want to bake some baked eggs and keep it in the fridge. So for the days that you're not feeling too well, instead of getting kind of more of the junk food, you just heat it up and then you're well nourished.
And I'm sure there's some times where, you want to treat yourself, you want to get something that maybe isn't healthy, but if you have some sweet craving or some chocolate cravings, do you have some treats that you can recommend that are maybe not so bad?
Uh, but you know what? You gotta live. Like honestly, my thing is that we are really living with a chronic disease. There's no cure for it yet. So if you decide that one day you want to have your cup of tea or cup of coffee and you have a Reese peanut butter, enjoy it. Right? You're just not gonna grab the whole package. But just be mindful that perhaps that day you might feel a little bit more sluggish if you're the kind of person that responds to changes in your diet, right? Or high sugar. But just look at us with compassion the next day. Continue with your kind of healthy eating. But don't just beat up yourself because you ate a piece of chocolate.
Hmm. That's a good way to live your life. I agree with that. Eat that chocolate. Life is short. Okay, I get that. I maybe then perhaps we could talk a bit more about some of the specific diets. As we mentioned earlier, there's so many of them. It's sometimes hard to navigate, but there are definitely some that are very popular right now. I'm thinking, for example, of intermittent fasting, which seems to be a very popular one nowadays. What's your thought on intermittent fasting?
I think intermittent fasting, like how when you consider, I be more familiar with like two methods. I think there's very methods when you abstain from food and drinks at certain times of the day. So I know there's one method that actually requires for 2 or 3 days, you only eat like 500 to 600 calories. And then they says 2 or 3 days that you can eat whatever you want, right? And so and then there's another one when you have like the 12 hour 12 16 or 12 8 or is it like 16 8, where you can actually fast like for 16 hours and then eat whatever you want, they say, during the day. So that one is probably more realistic because you can basically fast overnight, right? Just have an early dinner and then maybe have a later breakfast. So that's more doable. The problem what I find is that sometimes with it, when they say you can eat whatever you want, then you think that you have that whole pass. That's okay, 2 or 3 days, I can just eat for everyone, but I'm fasting. So it compensates. So I think that's where we get the message a little bit wrong. I think even during the time that you are allowed to eat, right? It's when you still can continue eating foods that have anti-inflammatory properties, right? Things that are included in your Mediterranean diet. So I see a potential because studies have shown that during fasting, there is production of less pro-inflammatory compounds in your body. So I see the potential, but definitely more studies. We need more studies just to see how to do it properly.
You also mentioned that there were certain types of food that you had to be mindful of. I'm thinking of dairy, gluten, and many others. I would imagine. What makes it so important to be mindful of these group foods?
Well, they say that there's certain theories. Let's talk about gluten, for instance. That was like a huge explosion. I think 10 years ago, nobody knew about gluten. All of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, a lot of people going gluten free. And so some of the proponents of the like completely gluten free diet for autoimmune conditions is that it can cause inflammation. We know that gluten free diet is the only treatment for people with celiac disease. That is also an autoimmune condition that reacts to gluten, right? And it can cause a lot of damage. And actually, people with Sjogren's syndrome, it's 10 times more risk of developing celiac disease. So we actually have found that studies have found that people with Sjogren's syndrome particularly can have that genetic makeup for celiac. So it's interesting that people with Sjogren's syndrome, they found that more intolerance to gluten than others, right? So I think that's where we really need to be mindful. First of all, I always suggest, because of that risk of developing celiac disease, which can be really a serious disease, before even starting any gluten-free diet, if you want to try, get yourself checked to make sure that you don't have that condition. Because what I found is that many people, they go on a gluten-free diet, they don't do it 100%. They will do it. They might just still continue. Oh, this may contain gluten. It's just a little bit. But what if you do have celiac disease? So you're harming yourself. So just make sure that you rule out any other condition before starting the gluten-free diet. But I have seen accounts that it does work. It doesn't work for everyone. And I don't think people should like kind of bully others into you have to eat the gluten if it really doesn't make any difference for them.
And what about dairy?
Dairy. So dairy, that's another one that they say that it promotes inflammation. That, and when you look back at the Mediterranean diet, at the core concept, they don't really drink like milk. They use mostly fermented dairy, so yogurt or cheese. That's really what the original Mediterranean diet. So, and they kind of maybe I started thinking that that could be protective and anti-inflammatory. And for the dairy, there is some research saying that there are certain breeds of cattle that produces a particular protein. It's called A1 beta casein that actually can be pro-inflammatory and produce some digestive problems. So, and there are other breeds of cattle that contains the A2 version of that protein that actually responds better to people with inflammatory conditions. So that is a potential. I'm actually eager to try one of those milks, to be honest. I don't drink milk, but I miss it. I loved it. For some reason, I was able to tolerate it when I was pregnant. I guess that happens as some sort of remission. But I want to try it, right? I think it's worth to, you can listen to your body when you try a new food, listen to your body for at least 48 hours and see if you present any reaction.
Hmm. Some other groups are also to avoid or to pay attention to. We talked about, you mentioned tea. I would imagine tea and coffee fall kind of under the same category. And does alcohol also is something to be mindful of?
Well, I think that the for the alcohol, it's like for the general population. I think the moderate consumption, let's say, of red wine or alcohol, it doesn't seem to be as harmful. I think people who are on medications like methotrexate, they used to say that, oh, you shouldn't drink alcohol, that can affect more the liver. But I think they are a little bit easy on it. But I'll have to say, I go back to my Sjogren's. When I used to drink alcohol, I don't do it anymore. It dried out my mouth so horribly. So I think it's just considering those extra side effects that you may have, right?
Hmm.
And when it comes to tea and coffee, it starts the same kind of dehydrating effects. It could have that as well. But with tea and coffee, they do have contain some antioxidants that can actually promote, can be anti-inflammatory. And I'm Colombian. I grew up drinking espressos. I'm not giving that up. But what happens here, though, in North America is that they don't drink espressos. they drink gallons of coffee. So I think it's always kind of look at the moderation and the timing. So if we drink caffeinated drinks, let's say after noon and the afternoon, then it might really impact your sleeping patterns. You're not going to have a quality sleep, then you're going to feel so tired the next day. So I think I would just be mindful around those.
Are there any types of food that you thought were fantastic? Is there any superfood or super product that you would recommend?
Super. I wouldn't say like there's, I would never say like a superfood. I think all foods have their own potential, right? Even an orange, that has vitamin C and fiber, if you can do that, is whenever you can access to, right? But things that I cannot live without is my extra virgin olive oil, because I not only that has the healthy fats, but the extra antioxidants. I also, when I don't want the extra virgin olive oil, I like to use hemp oil, and so that also kind of has similar makeup of healthy fats. I have really like great rate of condiments that I love to use in my cooking, like turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, like rosemary, all the herbs and spices. I really like to have, like I said, a garlic as well. And I like to keep some whole grains, like in my staples. I do eat a gluten-free diet, so I have my gluten-free oats, quinoa, and some corn. I'm Colombian. Sometimes I do get my treats, and I love my corn arepas. So eggs, right? Because sometimes we demonize eggs as well, and it's the cheapest kind of source of high quality protein. So that's something that is in the back. A boiled egg, honestly, just munch it and that's it. um, Yogurt. I always try to keep some yogurt as well. So for a quick snack, and any fruits that are in season for sure.
For some people who are familiar with your blog, you've been very vocal about medicine and cannabis and your usage of it. One of the side effects that is often associated with cannabis consumption is for a lack of a better term, the munchies. Is that something that you get? And if so, is there a good munchie treat that you could recommend to anyone listening?
Oh, thank you for asking that. And I just got to clear some misconceptions. So the munchies really is related to the consumption of THC. And so many patients who are only using like a CBD oil base, they're probably not going to get the munchies, because the munchies are associated with the consumption of THC that can actually, what's really cool about it, that it heightens the sense of smell, and so enjoy and pleasurable eating experience. So, and it tends to go for fatty foods. So what I find is that if we could have your medical cannabis, you're taking THC, hopefully not in the day when you're doing anything, maybe at night around dinner time, right? When you notice your dinner time, then you are enjoying that meal, right? So chances are that when you have the meal, you're not going to feel the munchies. But if it's not a meal time, grab some, like you can keep some dips that actually can work at any day for a quick snack. So like a hummus, like a homemade hummus, some dips with avocado and legumes, or like a avocado and beans. Then you have a little bit some nachos or veggies or cut up veggies. So kind of munch on those things, and that can help, and it's nourishing you at the same time. And that crave, and over time, that those cravings actually tend to kind of decrease. Okay, they're not going to stay forever as you kind of get used to them.
Christina, what would you say to someone who is listening right now thinking, I too can improve my eating habits? What do I do now? What's the first step?
Well, the first step is to, be compassionate, right? And first of all, just listen to your body. One thing that I really encourage my clients or any fellow warriors is that keep a journal. If like you feel that food is the one trigger that is leading to fatigue and pain, keep a journal for a few days. If you can do it for a week, that would be great. So you can identify certain triggers. After that, if you can consult with a registered dietitian to help you navigate those triggers, that would be great. And then when it comes to changes, let's say you are a person who is a meat eater, right? Like you love your meat every single day. So try to kind of have your like one meatless meal once a week, right? Or try to just improve like just your breakfast. I always go, but the breakfast or the meal that is like your main meal. Maybe your main meal is dinner. What changes you can make? Maybe you can add that extra veggies to that dinner. But I think guidance with a professional, it really makes a difference. It really does, because there's way too much information. I get challenged on social media all the time. I'm saying like, why don't I do a certain diet? It cured me. It can cure you too. So I think, and we are so overwhelmed and so anxious to find an answer and a cure. So one thing that my process is, you identify your triggers, right? You recognize what is happening with your body, what foods are reacting or giving you some symptoms. Then you kind of so some kind of reflection whenever you're eating. Enjoy that meal. Be mindful. You don't have to rush it. Now that we're home, but at the same time, try to keep some social distancing from the fridge. I know that's so hard,
Very good words of
but
advice there.
but you can do it. But then so you can do that, but try to savor your meal, because the longer you savor your meal, you enjoy it. Like up to 20 minutes, it sends the signals to your brain and you can stop that craving, right? You don't really gonna feel that hungry. You don't necessarily have to kind of feed a schedule, right? Like I said, oh, I have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Sometimes we're not feeling well. Honestly, personally, I take one meal or two meals a day, but make sure that
Mhm.
I'm well hydrated all day. And also just refocus on how you talk to yourself, right? Don't, if you eat that chocolate, that, like I said, don't beat yourself up.
Good words of advice.
Trash the
Cristina,
negative
thank you.
talk.
We look forward to more contributions from you on the Arthritis Society website. Until then, if people are curious and want to learn more and look at what you're doing, they can visit arthritisdietitian.com. Cristina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Flourish, the podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us at info@arthritis.ca.